Welcome in to the DNVR Avalanche Podcast presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. Actually, sure, we're presented by them still. Why not? Doesn't matter. Rudo, Jesse, Megan, here to talk about not the Avalanche losing in round one, but everyone else losing in round one.
Because thank God.
Well, look, we've talked plenty about the Avs and their loss, and as disappointing as that may be, I actually think they're pretty okay going forward relatively compared to some of these other teams that we're going to get into who it's like, oh, are they done making the playoffs now?
So let me ask you guys real quick. I'm going to derail this immediately. And I just really want like 1 or 2 word answers because we have an entire summer to talk about what I'm about to ask you. Do you guys think the Avs roster will look drastically different next year?
Drastically, no.
Okay, Megan. It's a lot of UFAs.
What qualifies as drastic, I guess, is the question. But
whatever.
I feel like the entire bottom 6 is going to look different, and I don't know if that counts as drastic.
I mean, it's really it's whatever you define as drastic, because I tend to agree with what Rudo said that no, I don't think it's going to look drastically different. But I do also agree with what you just said, Megan, that I think the bottom 6 is definitely going to have some new faces in it.
So, goalie's the same. That's not changing. Defense, you're assuming health, you're talking about 1 new defender.
I'd say 1 or 2, depending on what they decide to do.
Maybe 2. Forwards, Landeskog's not going to be healthy for the start of the season, so I think that's where you start to make a case, because you're saying you really need to fill 2 top 6 spots with Landy out.
Right.
And then the bottom 6 is going to be Newhook, LOC, and the rest of it is pretty up in the air.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So do you consider that significant? I would say not quite, especially if Landy comes back at some point during the season.
And this is all operating under the assumption for everybody that Val is back.
Yes.
Start of the year, right?
I'm still imagining him there. The hole in 2C is going to be an interesting part in the top 6 conversation. That could also make the look dramatically different. I think I tend to agree, though. I don't feel this will be so dramatic because the core is what I think of when I think of the Colorado Avalanche identity, and that's going to be intact. I think, parts are going to be like, we're going to see Bo Byram get re-upped. We're going to see Newhook likely re-upped, just something reasonable there. And that all makes sense to me.
Yeah. I was wondering, I had the conversation this morning and just wondering how you guys kind of felt, because I had someone say like, well, this roster could look totally different next year. I was like, I just don't know.
The roster just isn't that different. If you have Mikko, Mac, and Kale, everything around that is not that it's not important, but those 3 dudes, Kale's literally playing half of every game for you.
It's the Pittsburgh model. Keep your core, and you're always in it. Whatever you got to do around the edges. I was just wondering. Sorry, we can get into the actual conversation.
It's a good question, and I think it's a good jumping off point in comparison, specifically for a team like Boston. The biggest upset, blah blah blah. I don't care. Boston lost in 7. That's all that matters there. You look at their roster. Pastrnak is the one guy that they're really keeping around long term. But the rest of that team, I guess they have Marchand for 2 more years. Bergeron, gone. Bertuzzi, almost certainly gone. Krejci, gone. You get into some smaller pieces after that. A Nosek, a Trent Frederick, gone. Dmitry Orlov, gone. Is it over? Is Boston going to go from President's Trophy to out of the playoffs?
Look, so here's been my thing with Boston all year, and Rudo, you and I used to a couple of weeks ago. We would sit on the couch and you and I would kind of snicker about the Bees because we would both say
how predictable this all was. Yeah.
Right. And here's what I find funny about Boston. If you go back to the beginning of the year, analytics models really liked them, but a lot of people looked at the way that last year went for them and just kind of the way that the core is aging and they're entering that final phase. And I think a lot of people kind of looked at this year as like, they brought Krejci back. They're trying to run, they're trying to get the old band back together to run it back one last time. We all know what's going on with Bergeron. Marchand, while he's still very effective, he's getting near the end as well. Contrary to where it ended, there was not a ton of widespread belief in the goaltending because Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman had been good 1B options in their careers in the past. Like, there was a lot of uncertainty around this Boston team.
And that dude posted a sub 900 in the playoffs.
Right. Then they go on this historic run, and I think everyone kind of forgot that this was being looked at coming into this year as getting the band back together for one last ride. This is one last shot. It went really well. They went all in at the deadline. Everyone thought that, hey, are they going to have a chance to kind of send this core off into the sunset with one last cup at the very end of it? Like you said, I didn't see them losing in the first round to a wild card 2 team, but it ending in brutal disappointment, I thought was one of like the easiest bets you could have placed all year. To me, I think this is probably still going to be a competitive team, maybe a playoff team, probably a playoff team next year. With the way the rest of the Eastern Conference in the bottom half is coming, especially in that division, you have to imagine for me that Ullmark and Swayman revert back to their career averages, which is fine goaltending.
It's not President's Trophy, but they'll be
right.
Okay. Yeah.
Totally passable tandem setup. And that's where I kind of see this Boston team going for the next year or two until you really start losing some of those guys. To be honest, if they're not on the run that they're on this year, I would imagine that Pastrnak probably passes on that extension.
Yep.
And sees what he gets in free agency this year. But I imagine he got caught up in the moment of all of it. And, hey, we're on this run. We're not going anywhere. But really, I think this year was the last chance that this group had to really, really be considered cup contenders. You can always catch some magic and go on a run. But I think you're going to be without Bergeron. You're probably going to be without Krejci. Changing of the guard coming.
So here's my problem for Boston, and I think you're right in the immediate. Look, David Pastrnak is sick good. That dude could probably drag them to the playoffs, assuming they get competent defense at all, which with Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm back there, they should be fine. They don't have a first or a second in this year's draft. They don't have a first or a second or a third in next year's draft. And their prospect pool is not. They basically don't have any of high caliber when it comes to their prospect pool. Their highest prospect is John Beecher, I think, who's a 22-year-old now.
They have Shane Bowers.
Yeah. We know better than most that the ceiling on that might be pretty hard stuck, unfortunately. And right now, sure, Brad Marchand and Taylor Hall will do fine for them, but you already saw it start this last season, a little bit of a decline in Marchand's production. You saw it come with Taylor Hall as well, a decline in that production. Can the guys they still have continue to do this, Megan, or are we going to see them really start to produce offense at all?
Well, I do think this is a team that gets a slightly new look going into next year because of the changes we're talking about, inevitable changes of players leaving. They weren't completely silent at the deadline. I think they're going to have limited options just because it's not going to come about through being able to leverage picks, at least in this offseason, but they are going to have some cap space come off the books to mess around with. I don't think the Cinderella story of a year that they had this year is repeatable. I just think it was an anomaly in ways. But I do agree with parts of what Jesse's saying, that there's still parts of this roster construction that are very sturdy. And so I do believe that this is going to remain a competitive team, especially with some of the star power you're alluding to at the top in Pasternak and Marchand. But I think they're going to need to bolster this team in the offseason, and that's going to determine how competitive they look going into next year. I don't think last year or like this recent season is going to be a fair frame of reference for them just because of how star-studded the season was. But I do think they're going to remain competitive because I describe it as sturdy. I do still think that the way it's constructed is built to remain competitive.
Do we have to let them? Can we just have a Boston team everyone can dunk on?
Here's the one part that's going to be interesting for them, because I agree with, Megan said, that they're going to remain competitive, and Jim Montgomery did a really good job too. I'll be honest. I thought he failed the test in the first round playoff series, but you learn from that kind of stuff. He'll bounce back. I think he's a good coach. What if you're a Boston fan and if you're that front office, what you have to be a little worried about right now is falling into the dreaded middle, because I look at what's coming off of that group and the age of that group, and I think that there's maybe the tendency to say, okay, like what Megan was saying, well, we got to get right back in and retool this roster and remain competitive. And I think you just have to be careful because of what you both alluded to. They were not silent at the deadline. They spent picks, they spent prospects. You go start handing out some money, big money free agent deals to try to jump right back into this and extend this window out. You could end up in a really bad spot.
And then you get eliminated in the first round again, and you're picking in the middle of the first round. Yeah.
You become Calgary or Minnesota, where you're you're picking, you're making the playoffs and you're getting bounced round one year after year after year. And then eventually you look up and you're the Red Wings, and you went from having the longest active playoff streak to now holding the second longest playoff drought behind the Buffalo Sabres. And you're just in this weird middle land where you don't really know who you are. So I do think that's one thing that Boston maybe has to be on the lookout for. But I agree with what Megan said. Like, that's a good defense back there.
Let me ask you this. Do they get away with it a little more, as we alluded to after this year's trade deadline, where the fallout from the East going as all in as it did, not just Boston, but a handful of teams in the East? Does that kind of soften up the competition a little bit for them? Are they going to get away with it a little bit more?
I don't think so, just because all of those picks and prospects have gone somewhere over the last couple of years, and now it's all the teams coming up behind you. It's Ottawa. I know the Islanders made it, but suddenly Florida has re-entered the chat as, oh yeah, we're a pretty good team. We won the President's Trophy last year. Like, there's a lot of teams coming up behind them, and for some reason, Eastern Conference teams are just like escaping my mind right now. But I said Ottawa, Buffalo, all those picks and prospects went somewhere.
Yep.
Go ahead, Megan. Sorry.
I think Washington's not going to have a season riddled with injury quite the same that they did this last year. So I expect Washington to jump back into this conversation. And depending on what Pittsburgh decides to do in terms of an office management, they could become, it's a flip of the coin, but they could become something extremely competitive in the East as well. So Jesse's right.
Just building off of, I was going to say Pittsburgh, their goaltending just imploded this year. I don't think Pittsburgh is maybe as bad as some people think they are. Megan, you and I even talked about that on At the Rink 2 weeks ago or whatever, of like, yeah, Sidney Crosby missed the playoffs for the first time in a long, long time. You're starting to see the change of the guard, but this Pittsburgh team really is some decent goaltending away from being right back in that mix. I think at bare minimum, a Boston level where I think they'll be at next year. Does it help that teams like the Rangers and the Maple Leafs and the Lightning have also hemorrhaged a lot of assets recently? Sure. But I think the Rangers and the Maple Leafs are a lot younger than the Boston Bruins, and the Tampa Bay Lightnings are staring up at 2 banners out of the last 3 years. Like, all of those teams are kind of in a better position than what Boston's coming off of, where, they're now a decade plus removed from their last cup, and they're really in kind of the same asset position as the rest of those guys. It's going to be interesting.
All right. I do want to talk about the West too, but first we are brought to you by Breckenridge Brewery, the official beer of DNVR. You can get yours at your local liquor store. Use the Breck Beer Locator anywhere in all 50 United States. Yes, even Hawaii. No excuses. If you're on vacation somewhere nice and warm and sunny, you guys can still get your Breck Brew out there. Go to breckbrew.com. You can get sick merch from them too. And then when you're sitting on the couch with a beer, make sure you're watching Fubo TV. You can go to FuboTV.com/DNVR today. When you do that, you will get 15% off your first month of Fubo TV Pro. Super easy to use. It's just an app on your smart TV. You click it on, you're watching television, over 140 channels. It's really no different than using Comcast or DirecTV or any of those options for you. So highly recommend you go check it out if you're looking for an alternative. And it's got altitude, so when the season comes back around for the Avs, you'll be able to watch all of the games right on your television. No jumping through hoops or anything like that to catch your hockey team. Use Fubo TV today. Again, FuboTV.com/DNVR to get that first month discounted. Second period of the DNVR Avalanche Podcast, presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. Going to the West, I think one of the more interesting conversations on this side of the eliminated teams is the Winnipeg Jets. And things get interesting because the Jets, most of their important players are signed through next year. They have one more year to make some of these decisions, maybe do things at the deadline if they want to do. But things get weirder when the other day Cheveldayoff comes out as GM of the Jets and says, hey, we like our guys. We're going to try to run it back with this core for the 6th year in a row. I just don't understand what the plan is with the Jets. Can someone explain it to me?
No, and that's the problem. Like the fact that he comes out and says that, to me, that is the ultimate. It almost has to be the ultimate. Do you guys remember Mark Bergevin in Montreal? There was the joke for several years where if Mark Bergevin says you're not being traded, pack your shit because you're on the block. That has to be what this is. This has to be we're going to publicly throw cold water on this and then deal with all of this internally behind closed doors. You've got Connor Hellebuck openly saying, not interested in a rebuild. I'm interested in contending for a cup immediately. As of next year, I want to be contending legitimately for a Stanley Cup. You got Blake Wheeler. Well, first, you got your coach calling out your guys in a pretty harsh way after an elimination game. Then you got Blake Wheeler, your captain, coming out and saying, yeah, I didn't like the way Rick Bowness handled that. Rick Bowness was in the wrong for coming out and blasting us to the media when he could have had the conversation with us. There are issues there beyond your on-ice personnel. You can like your players, that's fine. That's not the issue. The skill and talent level of your players in Winnipeg is not the problem with that Jets team.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm trying to find the list of each, because there were several players that were upset in Rick Bowness handling
it was
post-game.
More than a few, yeah.
It was. Yeah. I think 6 is the number I have in mind, and I hope to find the number of the names of each of the players, but that's an issue. I felt like we hear about a culture problem in the Jets room, and it does seem to be, at least if that was once the issue, I think the players interpersonally are good. It's just now an issue of players to coaching staff, the head coach specifically, that are not connecting. That's a huge problem that doesn't get resolved if nothing changes. And that seems to be the plan in continuing on with Rick Bowness and hoping to re-up the same players as before.
Yeah, player-coach relationship, notoriously whatever. Doesn't matter if that's a big deal, right? Like, notoriously a passive detail. But like, no, Megan, you're right. Like, the problem is now extended to players and coaches don't get along. They've already announced Rick Bowness is coming back.
Yep.
To me, the writing on the wall is, like, it has to be this clear, right? Like, there's no way they're actually going to try to run that back.
I feel like Calgary is a cautionary tale for a few teams in different ways. In this case, it is when you do have what you expect to be the core or the elite talent on your team not getting along with the coach, it's a problem that can keep you out of the playoffs. Calgary, this is an example of that. And then with the Boston conversation from before, you allude to this danger zone of the middle where if you have a player that you bring on that has regression in their play, it can also be like a Huberdeau. It could be the reason you're out of the playoffs, and that's what Boston needs to be cautious of in what they decide to do in the offseason as well. There's a lot of lessons to be learned that Calgary already went through if teams choose to accept that.
Well, it's so funny because, and I'm sorry, Rudo, but like it's just so funny because it's such a good point, Megan, that like take a deep breath, and learn the lessons that other teams have painfully learned for you. And I think this is the part that's just so mind-blowing for NHL fans. And, Rudo, you and I have talked about this kind of shit now for years. The way that teams just don't seem to learn those lessons, or they don't seem to like heed any warning from other teams that we see go through it. I'm not to pile back on Linus Ullmark. The dude had a tough 10 days, but I've got his elite prospects pulled up here in front of me. Part of the reason why Rudo and I kept laughing all year, being like,
that's
gonna come crumbling down. That guy's going on 30 years old. He has an entire professional career that says he's a good NHL backup. Average. He's an average NHL backup by 10 years worth of numbers. He rattles off a 938, and people are like, they found their Vezina guy. Can you believe it, after Tuukka Rask? And it's like, how does nobody remember having seen this movie before? There's been 15 iterations of this movie in the last 10 years, and it's like nobody's watched it. And Megan, you're right. If Winnipeg actually tries to run that back, it's like you don't even have to look very far. There's a team currently going through it, and you're choosing to look the other way on that. And for some reason, when we do it, it'll be different.
So
we can bash our head through this wall.
I think the one thing about Winnipeg is that conversation is kind of flipped. Because the one thing they do have, the only reason they made the playoffs is because Connor Hellebuck is awesome.
Yeah.
But, and he's gonna walk at the end of next season. Like all signs point toward him not being there. And if their plan is, hey, let's go all in to lose in the first round again because Connor Hellebuck ran out of gas because he had to play 80 games to get us this far. Yeah. That team's just going to fall apart in a hurry.
If I was Winnipeg, I would go to Buffalo and say, it's Connor Hellebuck. We're starting with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and let's add some assets from there. Get some firsts, get some picks, maybe another prospect in there. Give Winnipeg a goaltending prospect that you can be excited about. I think Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen's good. I think he's got an NHL future. And it fills a need, for a team like Buffalo. That's what I think Winnipeg needs to be doing this summer. Start with your big assets that you need to move and go from there. Start acquiring these picks. Colorado, New York. Yeah, I'm not going to go with Arizona yet. There's multiple, again, examples around the league. Rebuilds don't have to be this long, painstaking process. If you commit and you do it right,
yep,
you can turn things around quickly. Chicago might end up being an unfortunate example for everybody, because, as much as everyone hates the Blackhawks, like they sold off. They went all in on getting rid of their guys. They have completely restocked their cupboards with quality prospects and a lot of draft picks. They may be able to get this turned around in just a few years. It doesn't have to be something brutal. Like Megan said, look at the cautionary tales around the league. look at what teams have done well, and embrace it. And I have a feeling that Winnipeg is going to go with the former, and they're going to choose to ignore all of these lessons that other teams have learned for them.
I hope they do.
Yeah, I mean, it's another team in the Central, so benefits the Avs if they continue trying to, like I said, bash their head against that wall.
I don't think it's going to end well for them, but so let me move back out east here, and let's have this conversation, because especially if you're new to hockey, is Tampa's reign of terror over?
Megan, go ahead. You look like you got something better to say off the top of your head.
I just enjoyed the way he said that. I think it's at the end of their window. But I don't think that means they completely go away. I still see them being a team that is vying for a playoff spot at the end of the season, is in a playoff spot, and is still in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I just don't know if I have them pinned as a Stanley Cup contending team presently. I think they took some swings at the deadline that didn't quite make sense, and they're going to have to live with those mistakes. They've pushed a lot of their chips to the table that they just kind of have to live with what the roster construction is now. I still think they're a well-coached group. They still have pieces of their core. Let me actually pull up their contracts to see who's definitely around for. Oh yeah, they've still got a lot of talent. Point Stamkos for one more year, Kucherov. So this is going to be a team that you don't count out entirely. They're going to be a pain, but I don't think their reign of terror in terms of the Stanley Cup juggernaut that they once were is quite the same.
There's a couple things you have to keep in mind with Tampa. One, this current core that is so dominant, that's a lot of homegrown talent. That is a lot of guys that they brought up through their system. So they've got a track record of being able to find some of these guys. Tanner Jeannot, I imagine, is who you're probably referring to there with they made some moves at the deadline that you're going to have to live with now. I think you if you're Tampa, you have to hope that Tanner Jeannot eventually turns into who you wanted him to be, even if it wasn't in the immediate for this playoff run. And the reason that I am with Megan that I think I'm ready to move them out of like perennial cup contender tier, but I still think this is a very good team that if they ran back to the Eastern Conference Final last year, it wouldn't surprise me for a couple of reasons. One, they're following the model that we talked about a little bit off the top, where it's keep your core. Keep your core and you can fill in around the edges and you can get there. And then it's Vasilevsky. You've got that dude. You're in every game.
It's a couple things for me. One, it's Vasilevsky. I will say he looked human this year. He did look beatable while still a very good goaltender. But the two things for me that, and I agree with you guys, I think they're still a playoff team. I think they're still very good. I just don't know that they can continue to march to cup finals and things like that. Is because one, Steven Stamkos will be 34 next year. The top end of their players are starting to age out a little bit. Now they still they're getting
into that territory.
It does. The things that happen at the end of windows are starting to happen to them. I don't think it's fully there yet, but it's starting. They're going to lose a bunch of depth guys like Bellemare and Corey Perry. So that side of it. And then two, their defense just isn't as elite as it used to be. Victor Hedman's still very good, but not literally maybe the best defenseman in the world. Now Sergachev does make up for that, but you look at the rest of their decor and they've gone from guys like Ryan McDonough helping fill out that lineup to Ian Cole, Zach Bogosian, Nick Perbix. Look, still a solid defense, but you're not talking about, are they actually the best in the world at every position?
Now, what would scare me if I'm an Eastern Conference team next year is that these guys are about to get a full summer's worth of rest for the full time in 3 years.
That's true.
I agree with you. Andre Vasilevsky looked the most human he's maybe looked since he took over that net this past season. But there was a comment that just popped up. He talked about it this year. Like, I'm getting tired. Like, we've played a lot of hockey. I think they were entering into territory of like having played one full additional season than the rest of the league.
Yep.
So, they're about to get 3.5 months off. Julian Brisebois is not afraid to make big moves. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those teams. I agree. I agree with everything that's been said so far, that they're approaching the end of their window and that you're starting to see the things that happen to teams when they approach the end of their window. But I also wouldn't be surprised if this core has like one more cup final run in them 2 years from now. Where you just get enough guys that come up that fill in those bottom half of the lineup spots just well enough. You pick up a free agent here or there who has a good year. They get bought into the culture. I agree with what Megan said. I think John Cooper's a great coach. I wouldn't be surprised if they made one more cup final run. But yeah, I mean, I think we got to witness a pretty special group and a pretty special run from that group over the last few years, but probably in the back nine now.
Happens to every team eventually.
Truly.
So they certainly made hay while it was good for them. So hard to feel bad for them.
I was going to say, I saw someone the other day that was talking about like, oh, what mistakes giving up all that they've given up over the last few years. I'll bet you they don't feel as good about it now. It's like, I'll bet you they feel great about it. I'll bet you they do it all over again. Like,
holy cups, come on now.
Yeah, right. Back-to-back cups and a third run to the final. I'll bet you there's a lot of chest pounding going on inside that front office. Like, told you.
They probably regret losing the third final more than anything else. That's
right.
That's the only thing.
Yeah. And then this comment's right here. Honestly, Vasilevsky gets back to who Vasilevsky is. He makes them so hard to pick against in the playoffs because of what we saw there for 3 years, where he would get his back against the wall and it was like, oh, cool, I'll just give up no goals then. Oh, we're facing elimination. I guess just back-to-back shutouts. Sweet.
I will say, for a team at the end of their window, no firsts for the next 3 years.
Yep.
So the cupboards are not exactly full for Tampa in that regard.
Yep.
Anyway, we are brought to you by Shady Rays. You can get your sunglasses today at shadyrays.com. When you order 2 pairs with the DNVR code, you get 50% off. Jump on it. Go check out all of their styles. They have tons of super dope sunglasses. We all have a pair. We have pretty eclectic taste when it comes to sunglasses, actually. We all have kind of our different styles. So there's one for everybody. Even ski and snowboard goggles, if that's your thing in the winter, they got those covered for you with all sorts of different polarizations. Their best part is you break them, you lose them, you don't like them in the first 30 days, just let them know and send back your pair you don't like. They'll send you out a new one for 0 cost to you. So go check them out, shadyrays.com. If you're local here to Colorado, they have a brick and mortar in the Park Meadows Mall too. And also brought to you by Pins and Aces. You throw your sunglasses on, make sure you're looking good the rest of your fit on the golf course. So look good top to bottom. Everyone loves their hats. They also have cool other stuff too, whether it be polo shirts or golf pants or spikes or whatever it is you might need. Our golf towel is maybe the best golf towel in existence. I'm not going to lie to you. The DNVR golf towel is fantastic. You can check out Pins and Aces at pinsandaces.com. Use the DNVR code to get 15% off your entire order. If you really want to be the coolest guy on the golf course, you can go get their beer sleeve or their liquor stick, which goes right in your golf bag. And then you're serving up drinks to people on the golf course like one of the cool kids. Check them out again at pinsandaces.com. Third period of the DNVR Avalanche Podcast presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. I don't think any of the other teams that were eliminated in round 1 besides Colorado, which we've talked about and understand a lot on this podcast on why they got eliminated and how things went this year, Tampa, Winnipeg, and Boston. Those are the teams I think that can have a little bit of disappointment getting eliminated in round 1. When you look at the rest of these teams, LA, Minnesota, the Islanders, and who's the other team? Oh, the Rangers. Yes, okay. The Rangers are definitely disappointed. Yes, we do
Disappointed.
have to talk about them.
So
Good call.
here was something that I was telling Megan. I don't know when I was talking to you about this, Megan. It was at some point recently. But, we were talking about the way that the Rangers went all in, right? And I know they didn't end up spending a ton of assets relative to the players that they got in, but they had to move things around. They had to make money work. They had to ship out young players. They had to ship out picks. I know everyone was upset with the Avs not making a lot of moves at the deadline, but sitting here now on May, whatever it is, 3rd, 4th, 3rd, who would you rather be? The Avs or the Rangers? I'd rather be the Avs.
Me too. When it comes to New York, their problem isn't the high-end talent. They've got Adam Fox in the back end. They have Artemi Panarin and Mika Zibanejad at the top of their lineup. They have Igor Shesterkin in net. They should have all the talent in the world to win those games. So what happened? What went wrong?
So, in my opinion, there's a couple different cautionary tales this season about this type of thing. I think one of them is the Calgary Flames, and I think one of them is the New York Rangers. I think the New York Rangers went on a pretty magical run to the Eastern Conference Final last year. When you actually go back and look at
it felt overextended, yeah.
How the sausage was made on that run, man, a lot of things went their way for them to get there. And I think they did what the 13-14 Avs did that next summer after getting bounced in the first round. It was, that's who we are. So we're just a couple pieces away. And they went and they moved a bunch of assets and they went all in at the deadline. And then they got to the playoffs and they really found no, you were a couple more than just, you're a bit more than just a couple pieces away. And then I think the other side of that is you look at a team like Calgary. The Rangers did not bring in insignificant players at the deadline. They brought in Patrick Kane, longtime letter on his chest in Chicago, 3 Stanley Cups, lot of experience, lot of veteran leadership. Vlad Tarasenko, letter on his chest in St. Louis for years, Stanley Cup leader in that room. I think it's hard to figure out where guys fit within a room like that. And you're trying to get them up to speed. You're trying to get them bought in. They were both where they were for a long time. I just think this was a situation where, like Calgary, you not upset, pissed anybody off, but you changed a lot of what happens in that locker room. You changed a lot of the primary voices. And now not only is it a really good player in Patrick Kane, but it's 3-time Stanley Cup champion Patrick Kane. Are you deferring to him when maybe you shouldn't be? Is he, being given, I don't want to say too much respect in that room, but it was just an interesting situation. And I think had a team like Toronto gotten bounced in the first round, you would have been able to say definitively between Calgary, New York, and then had it been Toronto, cool, changing your room too much doesn't work. I just think that New York got it maybe a little bit too far ahead of themselves, and they brought in 2 different guys that I think it's just hard to fit that into a room. 3 weeks later, let's jump into a cup run. Just a weird spot that New York got caught in there.
Fair enough. You look in the playoffs and, Patrick Kane played fine. 6 points in 7 games. Tarasenko, a little bit worse, only 4 points in the 7-game series. I just struggle to see an effective path forward for them because they're going to lose Kane and Tarasenko.
Yep.
They're going to lose some of the other pieces. Yeah. And if this core can't do it, they can't even really blow it up because they're locked into a lot of these contracts for a very long time.
Well, they're still young.
Not at the top. Kreider's 32. Zibanejad's 30. Panarin's 31.
Yeah.
They're not old. Like
Fair.
that core's got multiple good years left. But
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, here's what's unfortunate in my opinion. This should have been the year where the Rangers said, we're running it back with last year's group. And I thought at the time, because of what they had to go through to do it, I thought the addition of Kane was a mistake. I thought they needed to pick Kane or Tarasenko. And that was your bone you were throwing your team as a reward for everything they've accomplished over the last 2 years. I just think when you look at the Kane situation, they made their move for Tarasenko. So guys in that room start settling in like, all right, this is the group. Here we go. Kane comes out, makes that statement, and then it was obvious. They started moving heaven and earth to fit him in. And I just think that that's a weird message to send in that room.
Yeah.
We think we have to do everything we can to not only add already a scorer, we already added our guy up front, but now we're going to move guys out. Now guys are questioning who's safe, who's not. We're sending draft picks to bring in Patrick Kane. And it just felt weird. It just felt weird. And I just can't imagine that it wasn't a little bit of a distraction. I thought they should have done Tarasenko and they should have rolled and just see what happens, because we went on a run we weren't expecting to last year. We believe in our core. Let's see what we can do and then reassess this summer with another year of experience. Hindsight's 2020 though.
It does feel like even the failures of the first round for them point to poor planning, even just in game. I don't think they responded to New Jersey's identity of like shut down in the neutral zone type hockey very well, because the games that they lost were by a close margin because they had trouble meeting that moment when the games were close and on a knife's edge. They were unable to find the offense that was needed, and I think that the pressure became insurmountable for them in those moments, and they struggled to sustain any pressure in the offensive zone because New Jersey wouldn't let them, and they just didn't have a solution for that, even though they have the high-octane weapons up front, and they still will. Like, even though Kane is a rental, which I think what you're alluding to is part of the problem, it does send a very weird message that the necessary piece is one that's only going to be there through the end of this season, because then what? I think similar to the conversation we're having, you can't count Tampa out because of Vasilevsky. You can't count New York out of a competitive window because of Shesterkin. I know we addressed that he also probably, I don't know if actually we said it yet, but he also looked human at points.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be something I think keeps this group competitive, but they have decisions to make with some of their players moving forward. Even a young player that hasn't, it's like a new hook comparison in my eyes in Lafreniere, what has happened with him in New York. They have some decisions to make, and I just worry about some of the poor planning, that if there's not enough in-game response, in-game adjustments, but then even just the bigger picture planning that we're kind of talking about brought them in this room of taking these huge swings at the deadline, not really with cohesion in mind. I worry then about what that means for the offseason if they're still not quite seeing the bigger picture, how they're going to manage assets like Lafreniere.
Your Lafreniere point is exactly what I want to get to, because what do Colorado and Tampa have in common? Tons of homegrown talent. New York really has not done a very good job of that. Sure, they have Adam Fox, a superstar defenseman, fell into their lap. Awesome. They have not gotten what they wanted out of Capo Caco, out of Alexis Lafreniere. Even on the defensive end, out of someone like a Braden Schneider, it hasn't quite come the same way. In the Avs Cup run, they had a fantastic playoffs out of Bowen Byram. And that's my big concern for them going forward is, okay, they clearly don't have all the pieces to do it. They tried to do it at a trade deadline. They tried to force it. That didn't work. I don't know that they have the ability to develop in the young pieces in their organization to push them there either. So I just don't know the way forward for them.
Well, again, just going back to what I was saying about, I thought all along that this year should have been their year where we're just going to let it ride, especially when you saw, like Megan alluded to, that Igor Shesterkin wasn't having the year that he was having last year. You know, we all talked about it on just different shows over the summer and things like that, that while what we saw to Shesterkin was amazing, you wanted to wait a second and make sure, is this who he is? Or is he a very good goalie that's capable of getting to this level? Or is he really going to play at this level, all along? And he straight up got outdueled by Akeem Schmid.
For what it's worth, he had a 930 in that playoff series. So it's not like he played poorly.
Yeah. No,
but
it's just, it was interesting. I would have liked to see them let it ride and see what they've got and trust that they're in the beginning of a competitive window here, and then make some adjustments and make some, changes from here. Like Megan said, to get to this point and to bow out the way they did, it makes it hard to trust the vision that they've got going forward. You wonder, did they go through that rebuild and then their eyes got a little bit too big when they achieved success faster than they thought?
It certainly seems that way today. As the offseason plays out, we'll see. Like I said, I think the other teams you're not all that disappointed in. Minnesota is still cap screwed by their own decisions. LA's in a little bit of a weird spot because what are they going to do in net?
Bro, LA is a team that if they get that figured out, I think that's a scary good team out west.
I agree.
If they can figure out the goaltending, which easier said than done, but I don't know. Maybe they call Winnipeg this summer and say, "What can we do?
We gotta do.
How can we figure this out?" I really do think LA is a goaltender away from being a contender out west.
Maybe. You never know. And then I just don't know that the team's eliminated.
How many years of hockey Kopitar has left? Not that this completely changes everything, but he is a large piece of it. But I mean, Danault has been fabulous also in LA. So this is.
They really need Quentin Byfield to get it together to replace Kopitar.
Which I don't want. I really enjoy the league with Kopitar and Bergeron in it. So if they could just keep playing hockey forever.
I mean, he's 35. He's got at least a couple more years, right?
If he could finish that contract at least.
Yeah, listen, I mean, he played all 82 this year, had his highest point total since 2018.
I mean, if he does that
again, a couple
again,
more years.
Maybe he's just ageless, all right? Maybe he can just do it forever. Yeah, the East, the bottom of the teams in the East, I really just don't think we're all that competitive in the first place. The top of the East is just too good to be one of those bottom end teams right now. Obviously, the Boston Florida thing is a little bit of a different conversation, but
I also really I've spent a lot of time thinking about this since they eliminated the Bruins. I think we all slept on the Panthers just a little bit.
I actually agree with this.
Yeah. And not in the sense of like they're a better team than we thought, but in the fact that they're a year removed from winning the President's Trophy and being a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. They won a round last year. They added Matthew Tkachuk. They have Barkov.
There was just no belief in the goaltending, right?
Right.
But you get 2 months of good goaltending and you can win a cup. Yeah.
And that's what the three of us were actually talking about this just a little bit the other night at the bar. And I'm miles away from taking this to the bank, but Bobrovsky has the level.
He just hasn't been at it in a long time. Yeah.
Right. He's got the ability to play at a level that you would need to win a Stanley Cup. It's just he hasn't done it in a long time, and when he does do it, it's hard to know that you're going to get any consistency. I don't know. I just the more I watched that first round play out, and then watching Game 1 the other night against Toronto, I was like, this is a better team than maybe we thought. It's a team with high end talent that is playing loose and believes in themselves right now, and that's a scary team to play in the playoffs. It was when what's his name? Cousins scored the first goal the other night against Toronto. And it was just his celebration and kind of the way the team crowded around. I was like, those dudes are playing without a care in the world. And that's a dangerous team. When you have a team that has high-end talent playing with house money, I don't want to get caught in that path.
It's interesting. So my concern in round one was when Aaron Ekblad got hurt in game 3, I think it was. I was like, oh, well, that's it. Their best defensive defenseman's now going to be gone for the series, and they won't be able to stop anybody. But then he came back. He was okay. And their defense really is constructed quite well. Obviously, Brandon Montour having an incredible season. And then guys like Radko Gudas and Mike Benning, who aren't the best defenders in the world, but if you wanted to pick a, hey, this guy will beat the shit out of you in the playoffs type defenseman.
Right. Yeah. And they've got good depth. They have star power. A guy like Matthew Tkachuk is going to get a ton of Hart Trophy votes this year. When you just dig into the construction of that roster, I'm with you, Rudo. I think a lot of the doubt came from what was happening in net, but that's a much better team than maybe a lot of us
gave them credit
led
for
on.
sure.
Yeah, or gave them credit for. Is a better way of putting it.
It is one of those things too where I think a lot of their guys started playing their best hockey in the playoffs. Sam Bennett was just okay in the regular season. Nails for them in that series against Boston.
There's, and I don't remember who it is, but Jeff Merrick and Elliot Friedman quote, it's an old GM. I don't remember who it was that said it. There's players that get you there, then there's players that get you through.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of guys that get you through. And to your point, Rudo, they're all really starting to rev it up right now. And then Brady Tkachuk looks like he's both of those guys. He gets you there and he gets you through.
Matt, but yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you.
I hate it. Brothers in this league. I still call Jean-Luc Liam all the time.
Well, and especially since both the Tkachuks are dope. Like they're both really good. Yeah, they're both like really hard to play against and pests, but also can score. They're very similar. But I don't know. I'm gonna be. I said it yesterday. I think it was off the air. I think, or maybe it was during our thing. I think whoever comes out of Toronto, Florida, goes to the Cup final out of the East.
I agree.
I just think Florida's showing that they're a better team than people gave them credit for.
We do have one super chat here from Melanie who says, "Thanks all. I'm learning lots from you all," with a smiley face. Thank you very much, Melanie. We do our best to get a lot of learning in the off season. That's we're going to dive in even deeper as the offseason goes in. We'll get into salary cap constraints and what the Avs can do and all of those things. Oh, God, I got to sneeze.
Oof, what a pro.
Caught
Click
it.
on the mute button.
This time.
Yep.
Yeah. Look, it should be a fun offseason. I know a lot of you experienced an off season last year where we had 4 weeks to talk about random stuff from the Avs, and then we had 2 weeks where it's like, yeah, no, we're actually going to die if we don't take time off. So a lot more conversations to have this off season for sure. I'm good unless you guys have anything else you want to add. Nope.
I think I'm good. Just the off season stuff. It is going to be, it's funny because I made the comment, it's for all intents and purposes, it's been 2 full years since we've had to do a long off season with multiple months of nothing.
We'll see this August what we're talking about. It could get could get interesting. I'll leave it that way. We're gonna get out of here. If you have AHL TV, go enjoy the Colorado Eagles trying to close out their series tonight. We'll be back tomorrow talking more. Probably NHL playoff stuff, but maybe more Avs conversations. Who knows what the news of the day will bring. We appreciate all y'all, and we will see you in the next one.